Let's check this out. Joey?
Take a look at your screen here as these photos are just coming in from the IDF moments ago. The Israel Defense Force is saying that it has now cut off the city of Rafah from Khan Yunis, taking control of the Morag corridor that separates the two key locations there in Gaza. This means that Rafah is now surrounded on all sides by Israel's military, with Israel also maintaining the Philadelphia corridor. That is, of course, the Egypt-Gaza border area. Nearly 2 weeks ago, Israel issued evacuation orders for the people living in Rafah. As a result, the IDF will now be operating in a part of Rafah that previously it had not. Again, this is all developing at this hour, so we'll make sure to bring you updates as we get them. Also want to take you out to this live image that we do have over Oman at this hour. We do know that President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, is meeting in Oman right now with Iran's foreign minister for talks over Tehran's nuclear program. Iran's foreign ministry saying that those talks are officially underway, and while the White House does call them direct talks, the Post from Iran calling them quote-unquote indirect talks. Mark Chandler is the Director of Government Relations and Professor of Practice at Coastal Carolina University, also a former senior defense intelligence official. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today and help discuss all of this. Obviously, as I just mentioned, a lot of developments that are coming in here at this hour.
Absolutely, Josh. Good morning. And there are a lot of developments happening in the Middle East.
And really briefly, I just want to ask you, I know there's not necessarily a lot to say right now, but the situation with the IDF now operating in a portion of Rafah that it hasn't operated before, plus kind of breaking up the communication, so to speak, the area in Khan Yunis and Rafah, what does that say overall? What is the significance there?
Well, Josh, this is actually an excellent and should have been expected military move. It's a strategic location when you look at Rafah and Khan Yunis, some of the strongest areas that Hamas fought from, and has a lot of their command and control facilitated there. So trying to separate the two areas and isolate them is an excellent military move to prevent Hamas kind of consolidating its power and being able to move its forces around there. And obviously the Philadelphia corridor and blocking that entrance there, that's where Hamas still gets a lot of its supplies coming in across that border zone. So I think what you're seeing is some isolation events taking place by the IDF to further put Hamas on more of a defensive, but also facilitate future IDF operations. So this is a good move by the Israeli forces, and I think you're going to see some follow-on tactical operations.
And what I'm going to pop up here on your screen is actually, again, a look over Oman. This is one of the cameras that we have in this area. As we know, these talks are underway. You have the White House saying they are direct talks between Iran and the U.S., and then you have the foreign minister who is saying that they are indirect talks, which is an interesting use of words there. This is the post that was just put on social media a short time ago by Iran's foreign ministry. Again, if you look, it does say in there, indirect talks with the U.S. So, Mark, I wanted to ask you, what are the core interests, the red lines for both the U.S. and Iran in these nuclear negotiations that are underway?
Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, or so Trump says. So we'll see.
Well, I think, and you're starting to see this. Number one, Iran doesn't want to be seen as kowtowing to the United States. And so they're not going to admit direct talks. I mean, basically what you have are representatives from the United States. And when you see Steve Witkoff, obviously that's a senior.
That's a beautiful city, wherever that is in Iran. It's really pretty.
Level representative. Yesterday, he spent 4 hours with Putin trying to negotiate the Russia-Ukraine deal. So we're sending kind of this administration's top negotiator to these discussions. So whether you characterize it as direct or indirect is really irrelevant to the fact that they are talking. Now, we need to manage expectations because with any negotiation, they're coming at it from two different sides. But I think these sides are significant in that they are almost polar opposites. Iran wants to continue its nuclear weapons program. They started it in 2002, and they don't want to give it up. It's a sign of weakness. The United States says Iran cannot have any form of nuclear weapons program. So those are diametrically opposed, obviously. So when you go through this process, I think...
My question is this. How can one country tell another country what they can and cannot have? Like, I don't understand. What if someone tried to tell us that we couldn't have a nuclear weapon? You think that would fly? I don't think so.
Let's manage expectations for today. I think what we would see coming out of today is not a deal, but an agreement to have future talks. So each side's going to bluster a little bit. They're going to try to set up some positions, but they're not really going to come to any agreement other than let's talk again. I think that'll be success. If we go into a detail of what a good deal looks like, that is Iranian denuclearization in every way, shape, or form. Something along the lines of what happened in Libya, where the entire Libyan nuclear weapons enterprise was completely dismantled, inspectors in there, everything was destroyed, everything was taken out of the country. That's what you're talking about doing here with Iran.
The influence of other countries, when you talk about Saudi Arabia, Israel, UAE, what kind of role do they play in all of this? And maybe the U.S. policy when you discuss Iran's nuclear program? Do they play a role? Do they influence the U.S. policy in any way?
Well, they absolutely do. If we go back to JCPOA and the Obama administration, all our regional allies were excluded from those negotiations. They were held in secret. We talked with Iran at that time and reached a deal that didn't necessarily take into account regional security. Iran wants to establish this thing called a Shia Crescent, which is basically taking its form of Islam and establishing control from Tehran across the entire Middle East, all the way over to Israel and including Saudi Arabia. So you've got countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia that are threatened by Iran. There have been continual threats by Iran. They're very close in proximity. So we have to take into account what our allies in the region, our critical allies in the region, need. We have to take into account that obviously Iran wants to destroy Israel. So when we're looking at the regional mix of this, those have to be taken into account, especially if we were to use any kind of military operation. We have bases in the region. So we need to continue that strategic alliance moving forward. So talks without them, or without, say, Saudi Arabia's concern or the United Arab Emirates concern or Israel's concern, are really a poor way to move forward. And I don't think this administration is doing that. They're taking into account what our regional allies need at the same time.
Right.
As far as where Iran stands on its nuclear program, there's a lot of questions. I have spoken with several experts who say, this is what some of the information coming out of there tells us, but there are a lot of questions. Do we know where Iran does stand overall in its nuclear program and the ability to create a nuclear weapon?
Well, we do, Josh. And just to preface this, I am definitely not a nuclear physicist. So, but what we're looking at here is Iran has been enriching uranium. Now, if I go back to the original agreement, the JCPOA, which, by the way, the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, never fully stopped the Iranian nuclear weapons development. Matter of fact, it was going to run out, and Iran could work kind of under the threshold, if you will, continuing to work on nuclear weapons development. But here's kind of where we are today. Iran has enriched, and this is according to the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog for around the world. They have enriched uranium to 60%. And that's kind of the hardest part, to start with the uranium and then get it to 60%. That takes months. That takes a long time. They're up to 60% now, and they have enough, and this has grown in the last few months, for 6 nuclear weapons. Now, they have to get to 90% highly enriched uranium. That's the bomb material, if you will, when we're talking about this. That takes a matter of less than 3 weeks. I would give it about 2 weeks to take that 60% to get it to 90% purity. Wow, I now have bomb-making material. simultaneous, and we know this for a fact because even under the JCPOA, we know Iran was secretly working on the other aspects to a nuclear weapon, such as the metallurgy that goes into forming the core of a bomb itself. So while we know that, we don't know the extent, and that's what worries the intelligence community. How far have they gone in that? So when I look at this, I look at the highly enriched uranium taking about 2 weeks, let's say, and we know that there's some sort of activity taking place to form the core of a bomb. It's not within the realm of the impossible that Iran could have, once they decided to go to what we call DASH, which is basically a sprint to get a weapon. We know that it could take anywhere from about a month to 12 months. In that month time frame, and I'm going to stretch that month to maybe 3, that time frame, Iran could have, once it decided to, a crude nuclear weapon, probably along the scale of what the United States used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So you're really talking, you've got a 3 to 6 month window, no more than 12, before Iran becomes a nuclear power if these talks do not succeed and Iran decides to dash to the weapon.
Right.
And this is kind of a tough question to answer, but we've heard President Trump say that if these talks do fail and there's no sort of agreement that is reached, I mean, we heard from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt just several days ago. She said Tehran cannot have nuclear weapons. The idea that there could be military intervention from the U.S., is that a real possibility? 100%. Is that a reality at this point?
Well, I think it is a reality. I give it a 50% reality right now. But here's a concern I have, Josh, is number one, you've got this administration throwing out a lot of threats. Okay, so months ago, we talked about deterrence in the Middle East. And what Israel does and what Israel did is Israel said they would attack Iran if they did something. And then Israel did. So when I look at this, you have to be willing and able to back up your military threats as you move forward in these negotiations. War, and I'm not advocating war I'm not advocating military operations. Having been in 2 wars, I don't want the United States to enter more, but sometimes, you're left with no recourse. And so when we look at this, if we are serious in these negotiations, and if we are serious that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons development, the only way to ensure that, if they don't give them up and allow inspections on the ground and destruction, is to militarily go in and take out all of those facilities. And that is a complex operation. We're talking about Natanz, Esfahan, Fordow, places in the center of Iran. And to go on top of that, they're deeply buried facilities. So you're talking a significant air campaign and missile campaign that would have to be launched. And the U.S. has one carrier in the region. They're moving a second carrier. We've moved 6 B-2 stealth bombers to attack the Houthis, but those are also the bombers that can carry what we call the Moab. It's a very big bomb capable of going and hitting deep underground targets. So when I look at these capabilities, the U.S. is aligning a military capability that can be used. There are contingency plans that exist, so we have to look at that capability. Israel actually helped us out a little bit. When they attacked Iran, we had those missile exchanges and attack exchanges between Israel and Iran. Israel took out the most capable air defense assets that Iran had. Now, Iran's trying to get those resupplied from Russia, but when you look at that, that takes down part of the air defense umbrella that any air campaign would have to use. And this would be a campaign, Josh, not one day of strikes. We're talking days, if not weeks of strikes to ensure you destroyed that entire capability. So the administration's talking tough. It's trying to set up deterrence. And I think some of the messaging with attacks on the Houthis is helping say we're going to back up our support. But you have to look at this comprehensively, not just in attack, but also in defense, because what will happen is Israel will be targeted. And those other countries you mentioned earlier about taking their concerns into consideration, Saudi Arabia will be targeted, UAE will be targeted, our bases there will be targeted. So we're not just talking the ability to attack offensively, but be prepared for Iran counterattacking, which it will do in this situation.
And that's the question of how all of that would play out. Mark Chandler, thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us here. Anything you want to add about anything developing there in the Middle East before I let you go?
Josh, I think you covered it all. This is a very complex situation. You know, in these talks, as I said, let's manage expectations. I don't want us to have to use military force, but when you look at Iran getting a nuclear weapon, you immediately put Israel at risk, but you also put all of the other countries in the Middle East at risk. You could be looking at a regional arms race. It's not.
Iran would bomb everybody if they had nuclear capabilities, 100%.
Like the other countries are developing nuclear weapons, but let's look at the wealth that Saudi Arabia has. They can go buy a nuclear weapon from Pakistan. That may sound odd, but their religious backing aligns them with one another, and billions of dollars can get a weapon. So what happens when you have an unstable, radical religious group in Tehran with a nuclear weapon and their threat to use it? Then you get their enemy, Saudi Arabia, with a nuclear weapon. What's going to stop that escalation? The old mutual assured destruction that kept the United States and Soviet Union from attacking one another for decades may not be at play when you start to see how this would evolve. So this is a critical time to stop Iran from having those weapons, create some sort of stability in the Middle East, perhaps, and move forward under more peaceful, benign conditions, as benign as it can be in the Middle East, which is going to be hard to do.
All right. And of course, we'll see how it plays out over the next several days there in Oman. Thank you so much, Mark, as always, for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you,
Josh,
Mark.
you're quite welcome, and good luck today covering all these moving parts.
Oh, yeah. Have a good day.
It's going to be a long day, buddy.
And I do want to take you back out to this live image over.
It's going to be a long day for you, buddy.